Richard leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers behind his head as if he had just delivered a profound revelation. Women just don't have the mindset for this kind of thing, he stated with absolute confidence. It's nothing personal, Sandra. Finance is a high-pressure game, and Kevin is the natural choice for something like this. Sitting across from him, I kept my expression composed, though my jaw tightened as I stared at the spreadsheet I had meticulously prepared. The hours spent analyzing data, crafting a strategic plan, it all suddenly felt meaningless in the face of Richard's dismissive attitude. My fingers twitched with the urge to crumple the papers in front of me, but I resisted. Taking a steady breath, I responded evenly, Richard, I've been managing multimillion-dollar portfolios for the past 6 years. My firm consistently ranks among the top 5 performers in the region. Richard waved a hand, brushing my words aside. I don't doubt that you're good at what you do over there, but this is family business. We need someone who truly understands our specific goals. Kevin knows what's at stake. Seated beside him, Kevin wore a smug grin, his confidence unshaken. He was only 24, fresh out of business school, and had yet to handle anything more complex than his own personal expenses. But being Richard's biological son apparently granted him instant credibility in financial matters. I turned to Kevin, keeping my tone neutral. Kevin, what's your approach to managing the portfolio? Caught off guard, he hesitated. Well, he stammered, scrambling for an answer. I figured I'd start with some high-growth tech stocks. You know, ride the wave. Richard nodded in approval. Exactly. Bold moves. That's what this portfolio needs. A sick feeling settled in my stomach. Bold moves? That was their strategy? After a decade in finance, carefully balancing risk and reward, building diversified portfolios, and studying market trends, I was being dismissed because of my gender. My name is Sandra, and I have spent my entire career fighting to be taken seriously. As a financial analyst, I have had to navigate an industry where being underestimated is routine. But this was different. This wasn't just another condescending remark in a boardroom meeting. This was my own stepfather ignoring my expertise in favor of my stepbrother, someone with no experience, no credentials, and no real understanding of what he was stepping into. Richard became part of my life when I was 12, after my mother remarried. He had always been a strict but fair presence, treating Kevin and me as equals. At least, that's how it had seemed. But over time, his favoritism toward Kevin became impossible to ignore, and today, it was clearer than ever. The family portfolio wasn't just another investment. It was the product of years of careful planning, meant to provide long-term security for all of us. I had pored over the numbers, creating a well-structured strategy to ensure steady growth while mitigating unnecessary risks. Yet none of that mattered. Richard's biases ran deeper than I had realized. As I drove home that evening, frustration bubbled inside me. It's not personal. That's what Richard had said. But it felt personal in every possible way. I had worked tirelessly to establish myself in a male-dominated industry, only to have my own family disregard my qualifications entirely. Walking through the door, I found my husband, Mike, in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. He looked up as I entered. "How did it go?" he asked, his voice hopeful. I sighed, dropping my bag onto the counter. It was a disaster, I admitted, recounting the conversation. Richard handed the portfolio over to Kevin. Apparently, women aren't suited for finance. Mike's brows furrowed as he set the knife down. He actually said that? Word for word, I confirmed, pouring myself a glass of water. And Kevin just sat there, acting like he'd already made his first fortune. Shaking his head, Mike muttered, "That's absurd. You've been in this field for years. Kevin probably doesn't even know how to read a balance sheet." Exactly, I said, my frustration spilling out. But it doesn't matter. Richard sees me as a risk and Kevin as an asset, even though every piece of data says the opposite. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't going to waste my time trying to change Richard's mind. Instead, I would let my work speak for itself. My firm's portfolio was steadily growing, and I was already in discussions to lead a high-stakes project that could elevate my team's reputation. If Richard wanted to believe that Kevin was some kind of financial mastermind, so be it. But when reality set in, when the numbers told their own story, I knew exactly whose strategy would hold strong and whose would crumble under reckless ambition. For now, I would step back and let them play their game. But deep down, I felt an unshakable sense of determination, already picturing the moment when the truth would become undeniable. In the weeks that followed, I tried to keep the family portfolio out of my thoughts. It wasn't easy. Every time Kevin posted one of his vague crushing it in finance updates on social media or Richard casually mentioned Kevin's ambitious plans, I had to fight back my irritation. But I stayed focused on my own work. At my firm, things were moving fast. I had recently been entrusted with overseeing the portfolio of a prestigious client, a responsibility that demanded my full dedication. Determined to craft a strategy that was both innovative and foolproof, I found myself staying at the office long into the night. The endless hours spent analyzing market trends and running projections were draining, but the satisfaction of fine-tuning a winning approach made it worthwhile. One evening, as I worked late once again, my colleague and mentor, Laura, took notice of my unwavering focus. Leaning casually against my desk, she studied me for a moment before remarking, "You're really giving this one everything you've got, aren't you?" I offered her a small, tired smile. "It feels personal," I admitted. Laura arched an eyebrow. "The client?" I shook my head. "My stepfather," I clarified. "He passed me over when it came to managing our family's portfolio. Handed it to my stepbrother instead. Said women weren't suited for finance." Her eyes widened in shock. "He actually said that?" I nodded. "Yes," I replied, my voice laced with the bitterness I still felt. "So now, I'm making it my mission to prove him wrong." Meanwhile, at home, the cracks in Kevin's so-called success were beginning to show. During family dinners, Richard's once proud updates about Kevin's investment strategies grew increasingly vague. One evening, when I casually inquired about how the portfolio was performing, he waved off my concern. "It's a long-term strategy," he said, his tone dismissive. I tilted my head slightly. "Long-term?" I echoed. "That usually means it's not doing well at the moment. What exactly is he investing in?" Richard's expression darkened with irritation. "That's none of your business, Sandra. Kevin has everything under control." I decided to drop the subject, but internally, I felt a sense of grim certainty. I had seen this scenario play out before, overconfident investors chasing risky stocks without fully understanding market dynamics. It was only a matter of time before those small cracks widened into something much more damaging. At work, however, my own efforts were yielding a very different outcome. The portfolio I was managing began surpassing expectations, generating impressive returns that had clients more than satisfied. News of my success spread quickly, and before long, I was invited to present my strategies at a regional finance conference. It was a significant opportunity, the kind that could elevate my career to an entirely new level. Laura was thrilled when I told her the news. "This is huge for you," she said, beaming. "Make it count." The night before the conference, as I practiced my presentation in front of the mirror, my thoughts drifted to Richard and Kevin. A small, petty part of me was tempted to send them an invitation, just to witness their reactions when I took the stage. But I resisted the impulse. This wasn't about them. It was about proving to myself, and to the industry, that I had earned my place. As the months passed, the contrast between Kevin's results and mine became undeniable. While my firm's portfolio continued to thrive, Richard's comments about Kevin's performance grew more cautious. At first, he mentioned market fluctuations and unpredictable challenges in passing, but eventually, the reality became harder to conceal. During another family dinner, as we passed around dessert, Richard exhaled heavily. "It's been a tough quarter," he admitted. "Kevin's portfolio has taken some hits." I glanced up from my plate, keeping my face neutral. "Hits?" I asked. "What kind of hits?" Richard hesitated, clearly reluctant to offer too many details. "Nothing disastrous," he said quickly. "Just some setbacks." Kevin, who had been unusually quiet all evening, suddenly spoke up. "The market is rough right now," he said, sounding defensive. No one's seeing major returns. I couldn't help myself. That's not true, I countered. Plenty of portfolios are thriving right now if they're being managed properly. An awkward silence settled over the table. I could feel Richard's sharp gaze fixed on me. Not everyone has the advantage of working with institutional clients, Sandra, he said coldly. Family portfolios are different. I held back the response that nearly escaped my lips. Let them believe what they wanted. I didn't need to argue. My results spoke for themselves. By the time a full year had passed, the disparity in performance was impossible to ignore. Kevin's portfolio continued to struggle, weighed down by poor investment choices and a lack of foresight. Meanwhile, my work was being recognized across the industry, with major publications featuring my firm's success. The pinnacle of it all came when I was named one of the region's top financial analysts. The recognition brought with it an invitation to an exclusive awards gala, where I would be honored for my innovative approach to portfolio management. As I stood on stage that evening, accepting the award, I thought briefly of Richard and Kevin. Naturally, they weren't in attendance, but I knew it wouldn't be long before they heard about it. Sure enough, 2 weeks later, my phone rang. It was Richard. Sandra, he said, his voice uncharacteristically measured. I saw your name in the Financial Times. Congratulations. Thank you, I replied, keeping my tone composed. A brief silence followed before he finally added, I had no idea your firm was doing so well. I suppose I underestimated you. You did, I said simply. But I appreciate you saying that. The breakthrough came in the most unexpected way. Richard had always taken pride in staying well-informed about the financial world. He diligently read industry publications and kept up with market trends by watching the news regularly. Yet, one evening, as I was finishing up a presentation at work, my phone rang. It was my husband, Mike. His voice carried a hint of amusement as he spoke. You're not going to believe this, he said, clearly entertained. Richard is glued to the TV. Your firm's results are being featured on MarketWatch Live. They just mentioned your name. I froze. His words carried a weight that took a moment to settle. What exactly did they say? I asked, my heartbeat quickening. They called you one of the top-performing portfolio managers in the region, Mike replied. Richard hasn't said a word in 20 minutes. A surge of emotions, pride, anticipation, rushed through me. For months, I had been dedicating myself to my work, pushing past the doubts Richard had often expressed. He had dismissed my success as unlikely, yet now, the proof was being broadcast nationwide. The following day, my phone rang again. This time, it was Richard. His voice lacked its usual authority. Sandra, he began, his tone subdued. I saw the MarketWatch segment last night. I had no idea your firm was doing so well. I let the silence stretch for a moment before responding. Thank you, I said, keeping my tone even. We've been working hard. There was a pause. Then, he sighed. I have to admit, I may have misjudged you. Your results are impressive. Leaning back in my chair, I let his words sink in. The validation was satisfying, but it wasn't about personal recognition. I appreciate that, I replied. But in the end, it's not about the acknowledgement. It's about making informed, strategic decisions. That's something I've been committed to for years. Richard remained silent for a beat before finally speaking. Would you have time to come by this weekend? I'd like to talk. When I arrived at Richard's house that Saturday, the atmosphere was noticeably different. He greeted me at the door without his usual air of confidence, and Kevin was nowhere in sight. We settled into the living room, where he cleared his throat and handed me a folder. These are the latest figures from the family portfolio, he said quietly. I thought you might want to take a look. Flipping open the folder, I quickly scanned the numbers. The losses were more severe than I had anticipated. Several high-risk investments had crumbled, wiping out a substantial portion of the portfolio's value. It was a stark contrast to the steady growth I had managed for my firm's clients. Breaking the silence, Richard spoke again. Kevin told me it was just market volatility, he admitted, his voice carrying uncertainty. But after seeing your results, I'm starting to wonder if it's something else. I chose my words carefully. It's not just the market, I said. It's about the choices being made. Managing a portfolio requires more than bold decisions. It takes strategy, discipline, and a deep understanding of risk. Richard gave a slow nod, his expression troubled. I thought I was making the right decision by letting Kevin handle things. I wanted to give him an opportunity to prove himself. But I see now that I underestimated you. He hesitated, his voice quieter now. And I overestimated him. Hearing those words from Richard felt surreal. For years, he had dismissed me, brushed aside my expertise, refused to acknowledge my potential. But now, sitting across from me, he looked different. I recognized something in his face that had never been there before. Regret. I owe you an apology, Sandra, he said, his voice low. I let my own biases cloud my judgment. You've worked incredibly hard, and I didn't give you the credit you deserved. That was wrong. For a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. The vindication I had long sought had finally arrived, yet it felt unexpectedly bittersweet. Thank you, I said at last. I appreciate that. But this isn't just about me. It's about what's best for the family. If we want the portfolio to recover, we need to make some serious changes. Richard's expression shifted into something more resolute. I'd like you to take over, he said. If you're willing. For the next hour, I guided him through my recommendations, outlining a plan to stabilize and rebuild the portfolio. The process wouldn't be easy, but I was confident that with the right strategy, we could turn things around. As I spoke, I saw a shift in Richard's demeanor, an emerging respect that had been absent for far too long. When we finally wrapped up, he leaned back in his chair and exhaled deeply. Sandra, he said, his tone filled with sincerity, I don't know how to thank you. You didn't have to do this, not after the way I treated you. But you did. That says a lot about who you are. I smiled, feeling an unexpected sense of closure. This was never about proving a point, I said. It's about doing what's right for everyone. The days following our conversation felt surprisingly peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't carry the usual frustration when I thought about my stepfather. Richard had finally acknowledged my abilities, not just as a financial professional, but as someone worthy of his respect. It wouldn't erase years of being overlooked, but it was a step in the right direction. At our next family dinner, the usual tension surrounding financial discussions was noticeably absent. Richard even brought up the new strategy we had discussed. Sandra's got the portfolio on the right track, he said, glancing across the table at me. I should have listened to her sooner. Kevin shifted uneasily in his chair, his gaze deliberately averted. Since Richard had reassumed control of the portfolio, he had spoken little, yet the flicker of resentment in his eyes was impossible to miss. A part of me was tempted to feel triumphant, but I quickly pushed that impulse away. This wasn't about Kevin, it was about securing the financial future of our family. Later that evening, while I was helping to clear the table, Richard pulled me aside. His voice was quiet, yet there was a weight behind his words. I know I've said this before, he began, but I truly regret the way I treated you. I let my own biases cloud my judgment, and I was wrong. I looked up at him, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. Thank you, Richard, I said, appreciating his words. That really means a lot. And for what it's worth, I'm not holding on to any grudges. What matters to me is that we're all moving forward in the right direction. His expression softened as he gave a small nod. You have my full support. From now on, I trust you to handle things. Hearing those words lifted a burden I hadn't realized I was still carrying. For so long, I had struggled to be recognized, not just as competent, but as someone whose abilities weren't defined by gender or family ties. And now, it wasn't about winning. It was about the fact that Richard had finally acknowledged the truth. In the months that followed, life found a new rhythm. With Richard standing by his word, I fully stepped into the role of managing the family's portfolio. It wasn't just about repairing the damage Kevin had done, it was about establishing a strategy that could withstand the tests of time. I poured my expertise into creating a well-balanced, diverse financial plan, and over the next 6 months, the results spoke for themselves. The portfolio began to recover, gradually but consistently. Richard honored his promise, keeping his distance while offering support in meaningful ways. Instead of dismissing my ideas, he asked insightful questions and acknowledged the improvements he saw. The shift in his demeanor was striking. He was no longer the man who had once disregarded my capabilities. What changed between us wasn't just respect, it was trust. For the first time, I felt like he truly saw me, not as a stepdaughter, but as a skilled professional. One evening, as we sat in his living room reviewing the latest financial reports, Richard leaned back in his chair and let out a thoughtful sigh. "You know, Sandra," he said, his tone reflective, "I used to think I had all the answers. But this past year has taught me something important. The people you underestimate are often the ones who surprise you the most." I smiled, setting the report down. "It's never too late to learn," I said gently. He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You've done more for this family than I could ever put into words." "Thank you." His words settled over me like a quiet revelation. I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear them until that moment. For years, my drive had been fueled by the need to prove myself. But now, that drive had shifted. It was no longer about seeking validation from others, it was about knowing my own worth and standing firm in it. Beyond the family, my professional career flourished. The success I had achieved with the portfolio didn't go unnoticed, drawing the interest of new clients and opening doors to fresh opportunities. The recognition I had received at the awards gala was just the beginning. I was finally stepping into the career I had envisioned for myself. At home, my relationship with Richard evolved in ways I hadn't expected. His support extended beyond my professional achievements. He had begun to value me as a person. The tension that had once defined our interactions was now replaced with a foundation of mutual respect. While the past couldn't be erased, it no longer dictated our future. The journey had been far from easy, but it had taught me an invaluable lesson. You can't force others to see your worth. Sometimes, the best approach is to focus on the work itself, allowing your results to speak louder than their doubts. And when the recognition finally comes, it's not about their apology, it's about the realization that you've always been capable, even when they failed to see it. As I stepped out of Richard's house that evening, a deep sense of peace settled within me. The path ahead remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: I had finally secured my place, not just within the family, but in my own life.